With the first month of 2023 out of the way, I wanted to take a look back at some of the best and worst TV and films that January had to offer. Starting out with a bang, we saw the arrival of the much anticipated The Last of Us series from HBO, which sees Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin team up to adapt a renowned 2013 video game. It tells the story of a man and a young girl attempting to cross a post-apocalyptic America which has been overrun by the infected. If you saw my previous videos, you might know I quite like this one. Being a huge fan of the original games, I was very apprehensive for this, but these first 3 episodes have far exceeded all of my possible expectations. It brilliantly adapts the source material whilst adding lots of great new moments for the new medium. The writing, the world building, the acting, all of it is to such a high standard, and goddamn, the show looks so good. A must-see for fans of the game and newcomers alike. I cannot wait to see more of this. I need more. Give me more. Please. Next up is Hulu original series Extraordinary, which is showing on Disney Plus over here in the UK. Set in a world where everyone develops superpowers when they turn 18, except for our lead Jen, a 25-year-old living in modern day London, dealing with all the struggles and stresses of being a young adult in a big city, with the added pressure of not yet having discovered her power. Honestly, I think the idea of trying to write anything unique in the world of superpowers is a pretty daunting task these days. It is a very saturated market. But I have to say this does a pretty decent job. It's largely all new talent both in front and behind the screen, which is really refreshing to see. There's lots of brilliantly observed moments throughout the show, and generally the writing is really sharp. It is a very funny show, although I probably wouldn't describe it as hilarious, but this is more than made up for with an increasing emotional weight throughout the series. There's lots of great characters, you get some really brilliant development throughout the show, and I think it's one that really rewards its audience for sticking through to the later episodes. And if you're not really into superhero stuff, I will say this is as much a flat share comedy as it is anything else, so if that sounds a bit more like your thing, I'd maybe recommend checking this one out. Netflix dropped Kaleidoscope, which sees Giancarlo Esposito and his team attempt to steal $7 billion worth of bonds from a vault in a show that claims it can be watched in any order. Every audience member is given a random order of episodes taking place at various points both before and after the heist, with everyone getting the actual heist as their final episode. Honestly, I was actually kind of on board with the whole gimmick of the watch in any order thing. I think the idea of experimenting with the format and seeing how narrative structure affects the viewing experience is actually quite an interesting concept. I think the issue we have is the story at hand here isn't anything particularly special. I think probably as a consequence from having to be written so broad that it can work from any narrative direction means they do stick pretty firmly to a lot of classic heist tropes, and I think any experimentation with the narrative does very little to heighten what's there. If anything, at least with the order I was given, the end actually becomes pretty incoherent and messy, with a lot of loose ends just hurriedly tidied up, or in some cases not tidied up at all, which is a shame because I do think there was some potential here, but in the end I think it's a bit of a failed experiment. Apple TV brought Shrinking to our screens, which has the team behind Ted Lasso bring us this comedy drama starring Jason Segel as a grieving therapist who decides to take a more brutally honest approach with his clients, while simultaneously attempting to repair the relationship with his daughter that has suffered in the aftermath of his wife's death. With only 2 episodes having aired at this point, it's hard to give a completely fair judgment, although I would say the first signs are relatively positive. Although probably not as funny as I would have hoped it to be, there's enough interesting stuff going on here in the emotional side to keep me interested for now. There's some well written characters and relationship dynamics established early on, so I'm looking forward to seeing how they develop. Although I imagine it's going to lean more into the drama side than the comedy side, I would still love to see the joke rate pick up slightly more in these coming episodes, as well as hopefully getting to see a bit more of Harrison Ford, as I think he's slightly underutilised in these first 2 episodes. But definitely one I'm going to continue with, and I shall update you next month on how I get on. Our Flag Means Death finally reached our shores here in the UK. It has been a long wait, as I know it's been out for quite a while elsewhere, but I have to say the wait was definitely worth it. A comedy starring Rhys Darby as Steve Bonnet, our gentleman pirate, a man of wealth who has given up his life of privilege in favour for a life at sea. Banding together a group of misfits, we follow them on their misadventures as Bonnet attempts to navigate the treacherous waters of piracy. This one is super funny, it feels really fresh, there is a great cast of characters. Lucius as Bonnet's assistant is a particular standout for me. We also eventually get introduced to Taika Waititi as Blackbeard, and the chemistry between him and Darby is unsurprisingly brilliant. Obviously they've worked together a lot before in the past, and despite having a pretty absurd sense of humour at times, it manages to balance out its comedy with a surprising amount of genuine emotion. And so I know I'm late to the party on this one, but if you're in the UK or you're elsewhere and you somehow missed it first time round, I highly recommend this one. The first new film I saw in 2023 was Megan, which sees horror veterans James Wan and Jason Blum teaming up as producers to bring us this sci-fi horror. Think Chucky meets Ex Machina. I had an okay time with this one, I guess. Ultimately, I think it's treading over a lot of familiar ground we've seen done before in the whole AI goes bad genre. There is some interesting stuff here, I think, especially in the design of Megan herself. I think they've really nailed that creepy, uncanny valley vibe with the design of the doll and in some of the voice work as well. There's also a nice dynamic between Gemma and her niece Katie and how that's all set up and the tension that exists there, although I don't think this is really explored to its full potential. And we are just left with quite a lot of unlikable characters, which leads to a pretty underwhelming final act when you're not too invested in the fate of any of them. Weirdly, I think this might have been a bit more successful had they leaned into the darkly comedic side of this film. There are quite a few times where it's pretty funny, intentionally so I would say. It's got a very satirical tone at times, but on the scare front it's much more sparse. I know this has a slightly younger age rating, and so maybe it works more as an introductory horror to some younger audiences, but I don't think there's anything too groundbreaking going on here. Tár also arrived in cinemas this month, which tells the story of multi-award winning composer and conductor Lydia Tár, played by Cate Blanchett, who is days away from recording Mahler's Fifth Symphony as her world begins to unravel when professional and personal conflicts come to a head. This is a magnificent character study, with Cate Blanchett giving a career best performance. And when you consider some of her previous roles, that's really saying something. The character is nuanced and complex, propped up by some brilliantly written dialogue. It explores themes of power and how it can be abused, and the ramifications that can have in our modern culture and society. This film has a lot of really interesting things to say, and largely presents them very well. However, if I was to be slightly critical, I would say its more abstract and meandering approach to its narrative structure does leave a few of these ideas not fully explored, especially when you consider its pretty lengthy runtime. However, Blanchett's performance alone is enough to make Tár worth a watch. The final film I saw this month was Steven Spielberg's The Fabelmans, a semi-autobiographical coming-of-age drama loosely based on the filmmaker's own adolescence and early years as an aspiring filmmaker. This one was a bit of a mixed bag for me. There's definitely a lot to like here. Firstly, having one of the most renowned filmmakers of all time tell the story of how he fell in love with the art form and what inspired him is fascinating to see. It's a moving tribute to the art of filmmaking and a celebration of the magic within the craft, from handheld movies to full-scale cinematic experiences and everything in between. It explores themes of art and passion and pursuing your dreams, although it's a little heavy-handed at times. Where I mainly struggled with this one was in some of the acting choices. I think he may intentionally be paying homage to the more melodramatic acting style that was more commonplace in the time in which this is set and in the films that inspired him. But as a modern audience member, it just took me out of the film and left a lot of the major scenes lacking a bit of impact. Regardless, I still found myself enjoying this film even if it isn't amongst Spielberg's best work. But that's a wrap for all the TV and the film that caught my attention this month. Let me know if you watched any of these and what you thought. Of course, there's so many new releases every month, there's plenty I missed, so feel free to give me your recommendations on what I need to get caught up on. And if you want to see another one of these next month, make sure to subscribe. But until next time, happy streaming. See ya!